Hey. So the last time I was in here, I videoed your class, or you doing small guided guided reading groups.
Yep.
Sorry, I'm like nervous that that's on.
Hello. Take two.
So to start the conversation, after you had time to reflect on those videos, I just want to know what you're most proud of, or what you were most proud of, seeing those guided reading groups and students giving each other descriptive feedback.
I think the biggest thing is for the past 2 years I haven't made time for feedback, honestly. I mean, I felt like the feedback was, can you hurry up and get your essay done, come in during recess, and then I'd have the 5 kids who I'd help one-on-one with. So it's kind of reduced my load as a teacher because I've put it in kind of their hands, and I've kept them to kind of accountable so that they can critique each other. And when I jump in when necessary. And when I'm talking to students in general, I'm well, what do you guys think? Even as a whole class, they all know what I mean by a 3, because we keep referencing that rubric. So I feel like I've succeeded in the sense that I have given me less work, and guided reading groups has kind of become a lot more meaningful because I have time to actually look at their essay and give them feedback as well as their peers. Mm-hmm. So I feel like that's going well. The thing that I feel is frustrating is it's not transferring as well as I'd like. And it's not because I think we're kind of I don't know if these kids have really been used to doing that. That's the thing. They're not used to, I guess, giving each other feedback and actually taking it and applying it. So for example, they all were this literally was on Monday or on Friday. We're done. And I said, okay. And then throughout the week, or whenever, right before that, they were all finished with their essay. And then when I slowly pulled them with guided and then went through that rubric and we did a check off, they all had it checked off and they said they were perfect. And until we actually made a kid read it out loud, they actually started thinking, oh, I'm totally not done. I'm not even done. So the fact that they didn't use the rubric and they didn't self-monitor, it took me to call them out in front of those 5 kids for them to finally figure out that they totally missed a part of whatever paragraph they're looking at. Mm-hmm. So I don't know I don't know if it's going to take time or practice, but why aren't they self-monitoring themselves when they're at it and I've given them a checklist and they're not changing it, so that way by the time we meet they can actually say, booyah, I've got this, it's perfect. They're just not. Even my GT, my high kids, the first group you saw, even Jagger's it's gone, I don't even have it right. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but.
Okay, so let me just try to recapture how you're feeling. So you like students giving descriptive feedback and the peer-to-peer feedback,
Mm-hmm.
Because you feel like there's an accountability piece built in, and students are accountable to themselves and accountable to somebody else because they're giving feedback to somebody else.
Right.
But the challenge that you're noticing is the transfer, and I want you to explain that a little bit. What do you mean by, so you're not talking about subject to subject, you're talking about the feedback is not transferring in the work.
Yes, it's not, they're not self-monitoring. The only time they want to correct their papers is when someone else is giving them feedback. So the only time they want to, they'll go back to their table and they won't correct it. And if I poll them as a group and guided and we point out, well, what did Mason need to work on, then they know which, we kind of pinpoint it, and then they all start reflecting at that moment, oh, my paper doesn't have that either. And then they go back, but they don't do it before that. When they're writing the essay, before I even force them to kind of look at the rubric, which I feel like we've gone, needless to say, we've gone bounds compared to last year or the year before that, or even at the beginning of the year, they would never even thought of that. So, if we can find a thing to focus on, overall it's been amazing, the feedback that we've done, and slowly, scaffolding it. But I'm just curious to, what do we do so that they, how many rubrics and checkoff lists? We've done such a great job on that, and thanks for your support. So I don't know, where does it transfer? Mm-hmm. It's frustrating.
So you're wanting them to, so the transfer piece you're talking about is them giving themselves feedback before they give peer feedback. Like it
Yes.
sounds like they're doing a good
Yes.
job with peer feedback, but
Yes.
being able to like give themselves feedback. So what? So I didn't observe that piece because I only saw the peer-to-peer
Right.
feedback. So how? I know you're frustrated on that piece, or like just challenged by that
Yes.
piece, I guess.
Yeah.
So what supports have you given them to self-monitor? What has that looked like for you?
Like, okay, so when I had all the kids, they typed them up, so they wrote them out, and they had a plan, and so that was their own doing. They had to plan it out. Then they had to transfer their plan into their typing. So they typed their paper out. And then I gave them this checkoff list, and actually, maybe, now that I'm thinking about it, I think I've messed up. I don't know if I've really
You have the checkoff list?
Yeah, let me get it. So I had two kids finish, and then they would switch off. So they sent each other their documents on Google Docs, and then they had peer feedback. So we talked about how, like, we did the checkoff list, and then last time you and I were talking, we talked about the glow, and we've kind of made it so it's not negative. So we talked about the glow and the grow, and the biggest thing that we focused on was, I mean, I liked to talk about the introduction and conclusion, but the feedback that I wanted from my students was just the body paragraphs, because that's what we've been really focusing on. So they had to go through and look at their whole paper and go through and check it off. And then after that, they had to, thanks to you, had to look at the rubric and say, well, I would give this paragraph a blank because, and they had to say what they did really good job on, and then they had to talk about what they need to improve on. So we did that with each of them. So they were self-monitoring each other, or their peer feedbacking each other one-on-one. The issue with that I had was some kids took it seriously and other kids didn't. Or someone didn't put full effort in their essay. So that's like I feel like a variable that we can't really fix. But ultimately, they were able to give each other feedback in the sense that they could look at the rubric and give them 3s. And they'd say, okay, for example, Susie, you really did a really nice job getting a citation. However, I feel like you really need to explain it better. And so all they would do is put the glow. They'd say, goodbye. Thank you, darling. The glow would be citation. That's all they would write, even though I went over it. And the grow would be like topic, sentence, or whatever, or explaining. And they didn't really go in depth of like how could they improve the explaining. Like, you should talk more about Esperanza's challenge of blah, 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 blah. And, you know, they just told me the basics of like, well, you need more evidence. Here you go. So they could give each other numbers. They could tell what spots they need to improve on, but they weren't specific enough. Okay, so I feel like that, and then, so the kids took it, and they looked at each other's things, and they went back and corrected it, okay? And then I had them send them to me, and they were still horrible. So that's when you told me, well, maybe we should, so I pulled them back here, and I had them go throughout the group one-on-one and check it off, and then they discovered that it was still poorly done. And now, for the like 3rd time, they've gone back to look at the papers. And so like Ashley and Yaslin just finished their papers up. And so, I mean, I'm hoping that after you did the video, we did that when you video recorded it, that through talking through peer feedback, the kids were able to be like, oh, that's my paper. So maybe the self-monitoring doesn't happen until we hear each other kind of, you know, talk to each other. You know what I mean? Like,
to be able to share it with somebody.
Like, the self-monitoring may not occur until after people have kind of discussed theirs, like we did back there. Because I think what we noticed is that when I read a kid's off, that he would be like, oh, I didn't do that, and then, you know, Sue or Eric would be like, I didn't do that either, and then they would do that, but they never did it before until I called them out. So maybe the self-monitoring doesn't occur until that's why we have to do peer feedback. I don't know. That's a lot.
It is.
I'm sorry.
So what is some of your new thinking based on everything that you're talking about and some of the challenges that you're having with the feedback process? And I think, I mean, to just first to give you credit for the tremendous work that you're doing, because I think from where we started, like
Yeah.
you said, of like students giving each other feedback, I think you're putting supports in place and you're doing that, but you're noticing there's certain pieces that you want to challenge your kids with a little bit more, want them to go deeper with some of the things that they say to each other. So in reflecting on that,
Okay.
what are some strategies that you think you could do differently, you could tweak a little bit, or even like what are some more supports that some of your students might need to get them to that next level of being more, because the piece, it sounds to me like students are struggling with is
Mhm.
being specific
Yep.
in their reasonings why, feedback that they're giving to themselves and even to each other, and then transferring this grow, because like it is important to give like the kids of like, you did this really well, I like that you're having them do a glow, but then the grow piece is the piece that you want them to change in their paper.
Yeah, like they'll say, oh, my topic sentence needs to improve, but there's sometimes a kid who's like, I don't know how to fix that. Or they'll just be kind of lost, like, well, I think it's good, I thought it was good. I know that I need to improve it, so they'll add 2 sentences or 2 words to it and feel like that's enough. So you're right. So like, I guess a goal would be making it, I guess, giving them more sentence stems of like specificity. Being more specific about like what they want. And maybe I think like we could also, you know, we're going to wrap up this essay, and so we're going to start doing slowly again little summaries, and we can maybe incorporate, you know, instead of having 3, we just pick 1. And maybe one of the tasks that they do before they even meet with me is they have to fill it out. And I can model it with that group and saying, okay, well, here's mine, and I have an exemplar. And then I say, okay, well, instead of saying citation, what could you say about my glow? Why is my citation good? So I guess like my next step would be modeling. What is it? Modeling the peer feedback, but with like how to, I want to say like a good critique. Like they can say it, but they can't write it. And if you can't write it, that means we need it to transfer. And you know, I want to be able to hand out pieces of papers and they can look at it, and it doesn't require them being like, hey Susan, this is what I think was good. I want them to be able to write out like, well, this is what you really need to improve on. So I guess I think I'm going to do is model the peer feedback through a sample, and it's going to be something, just 1 paragraph, like 1 summary, and then it won't be overwhelming. I feel like maybe this was a bigger leap because they had to do it 3 different times, and they're like, oh, I have to do this 3 times. So maybe, and then maybe adding sentence stems. I mean, this is just a thought. And then I think that will kind of get the writing kind of going in that zone. And you know, I'm really happy to see that the rubric's really working, and that they're actually referring to it and they know what it means. Just applying the written critique would be nice.
Yeah. Does the rubric, have you noticed that the rubric is supporting their ideas of what to say? Like,
yeah,
if they're saying that the student's getting a 3 and they notice,
that's a good question.
Like, I don't know, like I'm just wondering how they're deriving at the feedback that they're giving as well.
I think like they're not using the language like we would probably want them to. I think they'll say like, I mean, this is a kid's response. He gets a 1 on evidence because like he started a quote, but then he didn't finish it. So they'll say that, but they won't say like, well, he attempted a quotation and it kind of supports the topic sentence, but it's not.
Do you have any timers? Like 1 for each science group?
I don't. Go.
Nobody
you know who
has
does?
timers.
Reynolds says.
What do you need?
Because Amber did.
Okay. You have smudge right here.
I'm
Come on.
only following
Get
her.
it together.
You're about to be videotaped.
You are being videotaped.
Oh.
Okay, sorry. All right, so my next step is to make modeling peer feedback with something smaller. And I'm going to give a sample, and it's going to be just a summary, and I think I will throw sentence stems in here so there's no disconnect. They can't mess that up. And then maybe model some of the language, but I don't know what your thoughts are on that. Is it too much? Like to do, and then like, where's the language?
I think you could always encourage that piece.
Okay.
I think the other things like the modeling, the sample, like you want those pieces to be more specific first, but like, are you talking about using the language of the rubric?
Yeah.
I mean, that can come through your modeling too.
Okay.
And that
Okay.
could be like even part of your checklist of like, or a reminder, like, are you using language from the rubric? I'm not sure, but yeah, like you said, like students were overwhelmed with having to do it for three different paragraphs. So I'm just wondering if they would be overwhelmed with doing that too.
Yeah, I think maybe just like adding tidbits. So not really drawing attention to the fact that I'm like, well, let's look at the rubric and look at the language I'm saying. I'll say, well, let's look at the rubric, and I'll say, oh, do they have a topic sentence that's relevant? And then they can say, no, it's not relevant, or it doesn't make sense. And so maybe pushing it, but not drawing attention to like, did you use all of the language? So maybe kind of like just putting it in there and really just getting this idea of, can you give them a feedback or critique, written critique that is efficient and beneficial.
Yeah, and one thing I'm wondering too, to kind of piggyback and wrap it up a little bit is the transfer in their work. Like that was one of my questions is, are you noticing a difference in the work that they're producing? And because I think we should start analyzing like where kids are starting and where they're ending of like, and you probably have already been doing that, but I would like to do some of that work with you of like where are they starting, where are they ending, because we want to make sure that like the things that we're talking about is making an impact on their learning, and obviously you're teaching too, but more importantly on their learning. But I'm just wondering, like, let's say that a student is given feedback every single time on detail. And so
I see. You want me to monitor, like, is detail always the issue?
Yeah, or like how
like
are students aware? Like I'm constantly getting feedback on this, and I'm not seeing growth in my own writing.
That's
detail,
a really good idea. Okay, I have an idea. Something popped in my brain. So like we, as a group in 4th and 5th, have ELD block, and our ELD block is filled, but we're just noticing that since the interim didn't go so great, that like the biggest problem is, there's other problems, but it's pretty much, can you write a summary? Can you write a substantial paragraph? So I'm wondering maybe like every single week I have them turn in a summary based off something they read or watched. And then we kind of in progress monitoring, we have been progress monitoring their grades in the sense of like, we did a test, we wrote an essay, we did an interim. And so they've done that, but we don't have one strictly devoted to just writing a paragraph summary. Which I feel like we're kind of like hitting it over the head, but if you can get this, if this can be stable in one kid's brain, it transfers everywhere. So I feel like I know we keep, focusing on this summary paragraph idea, but I feel like if it can just be ingrained into their brain for a really long time, then it will be second nature. So I'm thinking like, yeah, we need to probably progress monitor their summaries. And I'll come up with a graph of like, the 4 ideas. Like, did you get a 3? And maybe I can even fix this so that way, instead of saying in general, how did the paragraph go? How did the topic sentence go? How did each of them go? Instead of having it in general, maybe I need to be more specific. Sorry, that was really good. Okay, sorry.
So just summarize your new, because you have to go pick up your kiddos, right? So just summarize what you're thinking or what your next steps are going to be.
Okay, so my next steps are going to be is we are going to try to do a summary a week, and during that summary, I'm going in pulling back my peer feedback, my guided reading groups. I'm going to show them what it looks like to do a written critique through modeling it, and then I'm hoping that throughout the next few weeks we can kind of start monitoring not just the in general has the paragraph, but each aspect. So my plan is to model, fix the rubric so that it's, not the rubric, but the graphic organizer so it's more specific, and then progress monitor. So those are my three. So model, fix the graphic organizer so it's more specific, and then progress monitor.
And then next time we meet, we can look at the progress monitoring
Okay.
to look at student growth. I'm wondering to see like who is
Okay.
making gains and who's not, and who's needing a little bit more support with this process. And like you said, like, are they understanding? Are they clear about what their next steps are?
And they aren't. So I'm glad that I feel like they just are kind of going just like I am. So that's a really good idea. And I think maybe, I know this is crazy, but with all this, maybe they'll self-monitor a little bit better.
Yeah.
Maybe this will hit that idea where I'm like, it doesn't transfer. And I think if maybe this like idea of having to self-monitor, because that's kind of what this is focusing, it will transfer better. That was a good meeting. Did you get that?
So when do you want me to come in maybe after Thanksgiving break?
Yeah.
To give you, and then we can meet even next week if you need some help planning some of these pieces.
Okay.
Just shoot me an email if you need some help, like, or shooting ideas with progress monitoring and like what you want that to look like.
Okay. Okay. Perfect.
But then we can do another observation and like look at, more specifically of like student work and all of our efforts. How is it really making an impact?
Okay. And I know that you said in the interview, the email, like, do we want to move on from this? And so far, I'm like loving it.
Okay.
Because I still feel like we're still making gains.
Mhm.
Like, how do we perfect the feedback even more?
Yeah.
And I feel like, until this is like, we feel like it's, now that we're monitoring it, I feel like we can really tell if this is going well.
Yeah, because I think we do need to hone in more on
Okay.
like,
Is this effect?
is it being effective with your students?
Okay.
And are you noticing a difference in their writing? And the accountability piece and things like that, like, I think that's just gonna have to come with like encouragement, and hopefully like, they see their peers doing
Right.
it and things like that. But like, more importantly, like, just noticing a difference in the samples that they're turning into you.
Okay. Cool. All right, perfect.
So.
All right, over now. We're off. I gotta go. Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome.
Goodbye, camera.